Yes, so my name is Brian David Johnson, and I have no presentation to show you this morning. I had one last week. It was how to change the future. And we're still going to talk about how to change the future this morning. But what I want to do is tell you something that happened to me last week. I want to tell you about how I totally geeked out with President William Jefferson Clinton and talked about how to change the future. So I threw out all my slides, I threw out everything, but there is one thing I am going to need. I am going to need a volunteer from our audience to play the part of President Clinton. Now, I realized I would probably freak out everybody up here, so I actually talked to my editor from O'Reilly, Courtney Nash, and so hopefully she's around here somewhere and she will get herself ready. Oh, there she is. I see her raising her hand. And we will call her to the stage to play the part. We're going to make you the president this morning. Well, before I tell you that, let me give you a little bit of background about sort of who I am and how I found myself talking to President Clinton about changing the future. So I am a futurist. I am Intel's futurist. It's my job to look 10 to 15 years in the future and model what it will feel like to be a human, how people will act and interact with technology. And I do that because at Intel, it takes about 5 to 10 years to develop the chip. So it's of vital business importance today for Intel to understand what people want to do 10 years from now, a decade from now. And I do that using a mix of social science and technical data and economics, and basically synthesize all of that together and say, okay, if we look 10 years into the future, this is what it'll feel like to live. This is what it'll feel like to shop and to read and to talk to people. And one of the most amazing things that I've been seeing as we move forward is the size of meaningful computational power. So the size of the chip means that very, very soon, around the year 2020, we will be able to turn anything into a computer. Anything. We could turn that chair into a computer. We could turn my jacket into a computer. We could even turn my body into a computer. Somebody laughed, yes. The question is why, right? Why would you do that? And it turns out there could be good reason. But it changes the question. So for decades in the high-tech industry, we asked ourselves, can we do something, right? Can we make this work? You know, can we get a laptop, a desktop, a smartphone, a tablet? It was can. But the moment you can turn anything into a computer, you have to ask yourself a different question. What? What do you want to do with it? And so I've started using different methods. We've seen that science and technology have progressed to the point where what we build is only constrained by the limits of our imagination. Which is why I wanted to come here and talk to you, because so much of what you do as publishers and as authors thinking about the future has to do with that. Now, personally, we've been using two different things to kind of imagine the future and figure out what we want to do. And I got to tell you, as a huge geek and a super nerd, these two things make me so happy. The first, science fiction. The second, steampunk. Science fiction. So science fiction, I'm a science fiction author, and for the last decade, I've been using science fiction based on science fact to kind of prototype the future. Right? A good story is about people. A good science fiction story can be about science, but it's about people. And so we can use science fiction as a way to understand the human impact and the cultural impact of the technologies that we're building. And now steampunk. About 2 years ago, I was having a beer with a cultural historian by the name of James H. Carrott, a wonderful cultural historian. We were talking about steampunk, and he was saying that steampunk was this really interesting subculture that was really on the rise, and he thought it was telling us something about the future, because steampunks were playing with the past, and it was all about technology. So what they were playing with the past was thinking about how does technology today change the past. So I took a sip of beer, and I thought, wow, so if steampunk's all about technology, and steampunks are playing with the past, doesn't that mean they want a different future? So as a futurist, I was like, okay, what does this mean? And what James has always told me is that I always say that we need to use science fiction based on science fact to talk about the future we want and talk about the future we want to avoid. And James said, Brian, you do know that history is the same way. That you can have this conversation in steampunk to say, this is the history that we want to be from, and this is the history we don't want to be from. And we turned into this really fascinating project, which turned into a book that we've just published called Vintage Tomorrows from O'Reilly. It's called Vintage Tomorrows, a historian and a futurist journey through steampunk and into the future of technology. Out this week from O'Reilly. See, I did that. But yeah, it was really, really fun to do. So we started thinking about how then do we change the future? And I've been traveling around, and I take my job quite seriously. I do realize that as Intel's futurist, I could quite possibly, if I do my job correctly, touch the lives of almost every single human being on the planet. And the future is made every day by people, right? The future just doesn't happen. It's made every day by people. So how do we do it? How do we build the future? How do we change the future? And I had gone around and asked lots of really, really smart folks about it. And I was actually in London sitting with Cory Doctorow, who we'll see later today. Was talking with Cory Doctorow, and I think I asked him, so Cory, if you could influence 5 people in the future, we need to figure out how do we change the future, how do we make the future better? So I asked Cory, what 5 people would you influence to change the future? And Cory thought for a moment and he said, that's a really stupid question, right? He said, it doesn't work like that. The future doesn't work like that. You can't just be 5 people. There's not 5 people that do that. And we continued to kind of talk about it and argue about it because that's what Cory and I like to do. So we kept arguing, and we got to the point where we realized that the way you change the future is you change the story that people tell themselves about the future that they will live in. That has such a massive effect. It's so simple. But if you change the story that we're telling ourselves about the future that we will live in, we will actually have a different future. Enter President Clinton. Let's give a round of applause. Let's get President Clinton up here on stage. She is such a good sport. So President Clinton, you will be right here. You will be shaking hands and taking pictures. Shaking hands, taking pictures. Okay, I'll be over here. So I was curating a conference. I curate a conference called Transform with will.i.am, where we talk about how to transform communities and how we transform education. And we were very fortunate this year to get President Clinton to come and talk to us. And so I realized I could use this moment to prep for today. So when you go in to meet the president, I was curating, so I was late. There was a huge line of people. And you walk in and you're like, look, it's President Clinton. Goodness. So I'm standing in line, and I'm kind of walking along, and I'm getting ready, and you're kind of going up, and they're ushering people through. They take pictures, they get you out. They take pictures, they get you out. So I'm walking up, and I'm thinking literally about standing on this stage and thinking, how could I talk to the president about how do we change the future? Well, what do we need to do? He's taking pictures and waving. He's taking pictures and waving. And then I realized, okay, I'm just going to do it. And if what I get from him is good enough, I'm going to throw everything else away. So I'm there. And I go up to President Clinton and I say, hello, President Clinton. My name's Brian David Johnson. I'm a futurist. I was the curator of this conference. And he looks at me like only a president can and says, I know. So I got to tell you, a little piece of me went, yee! But I kept my composure, right? There is a question that I needed to ask the president. It's good I didn't do that. I need to ask the president. So I go up to the president and I say, I'm Brian David Johnson. I say, Mr. President, are you a fan of science fiction? Now, he kind of looks at me, and now we're going to trade. So now I'm President Clinton. So we're still shaking hands. And he starts to think, for real. I don't know if you've ever seen the president, but he also starts to move you out because they're taking pictures, and he wants me out the door. So he's starting to move me. So as he's moving me, he's thinking, and I'm thinking. Here's what I'm thinking. He's moving, and this has nothing to do with this talk today, by the way. What I'm thinking 2 things. 1, wow, the president's got really soft hands. Number 2, I'm bigger than the president. Like, this seems wrong. I know. You are bigger than the president. that seems wrong, right? Like, it shouldn't be that way. So this is what I'm thinking, right? Ooh, futurist, thinking about the future. No, I'm thinking the president has soft hands. So he's moving me around. So we're getting over here, and he's about ready to send me off. And by the way, they're taking pictures constantly, but I don't care about the pictures at all. We get to about here, I turn, and he looks at me and says, you know what? I was a fan of science fiction. I'm actually a big fan of Isaac Asimov. But you know, Brian, I've always thought that if we can get those images into the heads of kids, if we can get those future images into the heads of people, we can really change their lives. The whole time, by the way, we're holding hands. So he says this to me, and of course, what do I do inside? And he goes, thank you very much for the work that you're doing, and sends me off. Thank you, President Clinton. And that was really it, right? I think for the work that you do, for the work that we all do, as publishers, as writers, as thinkers, as technologists, how do we change the story that people are going to tell themselves about the future that they will live in? That's what we do. That's what Tim was talking about earlier when he was saying you can't be fearful of the future and go out and do things that are meaningful. That's what we do. That's our stock in trade. Our stock in trade is having stories, having narrative. Narrative matters. Words matter. Opinions matter. And we need to get those opinions out there. And I think for me, when I was thinking about coming to the TOC and talking about the future of publishing, I think that was it. That there's this incredible amount of opportunity that's out there, right? As I said, very soon we will have the ability to turn anything into a computer. What that means is that we will be able to turn anything into a device or a medium to change that narrative, to reach people. Now, that could be books, it could be printed books, it could be electronic books, it could be audio podcasts, it could be any of these things. And for me, as a futurist, and as I look 10 to 15 years out, the what it is, the device that it's on, doesn't matter anymore. Because you are in this room and because you are here, you are good at changing that narrative. You are good at telling those stories. You are good at reaching people. And that's what you'll do. Simply by being in this room today, you will change the future. The future is made every day by the actions of people, and very specifically, the future of publishing sits in this room. Literally, everything you would do. The future is that important, right? You can't punt. It's incredibly important. And you're the ones who will do it. No one else is going to do it. You are the ones who can do it. But it goes even further than that. It goes back to the conversation that I had with Corey about changing the story that people will tell themselves about the future that they will live in. That because you do what you do, you will get out there. You will tell those stories. You will change that narrative. You will find yourself on all these amazing new platforms, amazing new devices. Heck, when we can turn our bodies into a computer, what does that mean for the future of publishing? What does that mean for the future of narrative? But because you are here today and at this conference, that's what you will do. You will change the future. Thank you very much.